now in the Shingon or the Tendai jurisdiction, perhaps both. And every year there is a special and wonderful ceremony given there to honor the Mother of Buddha. It is the only temple so dedicated, I guess, in Japan as far as we know, although she occurs in much of the sacred art of the country. But anyway, once a year there is a special ceremony for her at night, and a great procession of followers, both men and women, carrying torches, go up the pathway leading up the side of this mountain to the temple. And it's a very unusual spectacle and very dramatic and moving to see these rows of lights climbing up to the abode of Maya Buddha. Anyway, the entire story now goes back to a series of principles. And I think we all need the realization that mystic Buddhism, esoteric Buddhism, has always more or less held that the whole story comes back to the individual. That the individual, we are all, in one way or another, bodhisattvas in the making. Some have gone further than others, but all, regardless of their estates, are on the way to perfection, on the way to the completion of the universal purpose for which they were intended. And this is one of the points that is quite a situation between Eastern and Western thinking. The Eastern mind has a concept, at least, of what the intentional end is. In the West, this concept seems to be almost completely lacking. The average individual going through life does not know why things happen to him. He does not know how to handle problems that arise. And when he approaches the end of life, he doesn't know where he's going or what the future holds. In the Orient, conjecture at least, symbolic thinking, has brought certain consolation relating to this type of thinking. It tells definitely that all things, great and small, from the soul in a grain of sand to a great cosmic system or a great galaxy, all is moving triumphantly and inevitably into identity with the eternal light at the source of all. But now this light has to have meaning, or just to say that we are bathed in a great radiance would not be very consoling. But this light, which we don't understand, this infinite life, is the thing that created everything that exists. It is the ultimate of wisdom. It is the ultimate of beauty. It is the ultimate of virtue. There is nothing that exists without it, and nothing that possesses it can cease to exist. All things, therefore, are part of an incredible, inconceivable, eternal value, eternal reality. To try to define this in the simple terms of human experience is vanity. We can't explain it because we have not yet fully experienced it. All that we know of it now will be represented by little sparks, momentary senses of illumination or enlightenment. But the great value is beyond our estimation. But toward it we are moving. Therefore, the motion behind all things is toward perfection. And perfection is reunion with the infinite. Perfection is the end forever of the imperfections which cause mortal existence and mortal strife. Therefore, to the Buddhist concept, the revelation of life is this inner experience, this something or other that we all have to face or go through. Therefore, we can say, if we wish, that mortal persons, men and women alike, are all aspects of Maya Buddha, the Mother. We are all mothers because through us truth must be born. We are parents because it is through us that the eternal light must come into manifestation. We will be invited to accept this destiny simply because by so doing we sacrifice nothing that is real, retain everything that has eternal value. Now, some people will say, well, that may be true, but in this eternal pattern of things, All my own personal desires are threatened. I want to do certain things myself. I want to be myself. I want to continue to exhibit my own competitive relationship with other creatures. And that, we would say then, that man declines to become the embodiment of the infinite. He is not ready yet. He must have a little more experience. He must gradually outgrow the illusions which he now regards as important. He must triumph over his own weaknesses, his own inabilities, and his own fallacies. Now, this is also more or less conditioned in the life of Buddha by the illumination scene. Buddha became a holy man. He became a searcher after truth. In the carvings and sculpturings of him, we see some in which he is nothing but skin and bones because he has fasted in search of reality. Everywhere he has sought truth. He has had the visions of the sick and the dying and the ignorant persons. He has renounced his kingdom. He has renounced his family. He has gone alone in search of the reality of life. Therefore, finally, in the great illumination scene, we find that he gains that which was the fulfillment of his original purpose. He is surrounded by the beings who have gone before him and who have found the way as he has found it. He has kept the truth. The deities of darkness, Mara, the principle of illusion, retires under the earth. Temptation fails. He is beyond all temptation, and in that way, in the silence of the night, he attains the Buddhahood. Having become the Buddha, he gives the rest of his life to the ministry. Now, the Buddha is in each individual a factor which may be called Bodhi. Bodhi is enlightenment, luminosity. Bodhi is power of soul. Now, the soul is a symbol of a link, as Walt Whitman has also poetically mentioned, is a link between spirit and mind. The mind, which can be and often is the slayer of reality, represents worldliness brought to its highest capacity in the scholar, in the sage. It is this sage which in the one part of the story we find casting the nativity of the young prince, recognizing his divine destiny and regretting that he cannot live to see it, so that he becomes a teacher but cannot behold the glory of the great fulfillment. Moses was able to bring the children of Israel to the gates of the promised land, but he was not permitted to enter. All these fables go back to the human consciousness itself. We have here then the individual attempting to understand an embodiment of a divine power within himself. It is really not exactly that either. You have to hunt for just the right words. It is not that it is embodied at that time, because it is always there. But the embodiment becomes apperceivable. The individual becomes aware of this embodiment. So it is assumed that the embodiment takes place when awareness of it is achieved. But it is there all the time. It was the seed of it, the Buddha seed, was there while the spirit was itself still merely an atom in space. So in the story, each individual has to become the immaculate parent of truth. The body has to become the servant of the infinite. It has to be rededicated to the purposes for which it was originally fashioned. Thus, we start in to contemplate the problems of the virtues as we find them in the Buddhist fable. In the first place, we know that the Buddhist commandments are rather different from ours, but have the same basic ethical implications. But a modern Mahayana Buddhist does not feel that the great achievement is through renunciation. The Southern Buddhist makes renunciation very strong. The original revelation of the initiation of Buddha makes renunciation very strong. But in modern thinking, in more recent times, since the beginning of the Christian era, the path of Buddhism has been one of fulfillment, of a rather joyous state of things, a kindly and pleasant realization. This realization is that the search for virtue is a joyous kind of dance. It is not some burdensome, frustrating, tiring thing. One thing that makes it more simple is that the light we seek cannot come until we are tired of the things that hurt. Hurting is a kind of prodding. Hurting is a continuous statement of our own ineptitudes. When hurting comes, ignorance is somewhere not far away. Even physical pain can be exaggerated by the hurting of futility, where the individual has no idea, no hope, no concept of why things happen. Now, it is not often that we will find a person who has lived a long life without some pain. It is part of existence. But the purpose that the Buddhist seeks to achieve is not necessarily that he won't hurt anymore, but rather that the hurting becomes part of a recognized good, that pain is necessary to the correction of ill, that if we did not have the symptoms that hurt, we would never find a remedy for the malady. So all the problems of living are part of a growing process. And out of this growing comes the realization that Bodhi is within ourselves. The great throne of the Buddhist experience is within the human heart itself. In the Northern School, the heart doctrine, the Buddha is represented seated in the human heart, either by his appearance or by his symbol or by the ideoglyph that represents him. He is therefore the desired of all nations. He is the one who comes to heal the sorrow of the world. His miracle is perfection. His entire fulfillment is the taking over of the life. And in this taking over, every person who accepts the ministry is in a sense a Shakti. In other words, the acceptor is the feminine part of the transaction, because it is the one to whom is entrusted the bringing forth of the perfect soul and also the creation of the perfect world. The birth of the perfect soul is a symbol of the final redemption of the entire cosmic system. It is part of a great plan that goes on. And those who today perhaps are a little sad and a little troubled and a little tired by the difficulties of the times may also bear in mind that if they look closely, they will see that every mistake that is made brings a correction closer. Little by little, we get tired of our own unnecessary misfortunes. Little by little, we are going to recover from the false systems which we have now instituted as part of our way of life. But in Northern Buddhism, there is no war against these principles. The individual is not told to get up and carry a banner. He's not going to picket something. He's not going to be an activist and shoot somebody. This isn't the way it's done in the Buddhist philosophy of life. The Buddhist philosophy will never avenge himself by hurting others. As one example of that was in the case of the Buddhist problems in Burma, where at one time in Burma and in the Indo-Chinese republics, the Buddhist monks protesting against tyranny committed suicide, burned themselves to death, but did not injure anyone else. This was a peculiar point. It was a great reprimand against the other person, but the other person obviously didn't particularly care. But it was the only way in which the individual could remonstrate without violence to another person. So in all of the Buddhist philosophies, we have this particular point strongly emphasized, that it is not through violence, because it is only through the death of violence. So we are told that when Surya, the sun god, sought out the person in whom he would dwell for 3 years before he was born as Buddha, he found this pure wife of the Indian king. She was, again, the virgin, the symbol of purification. In this case, she was to be the anointed instrument of the embodiment. Her purity, therefore, becomes a symbol of the purity of all the Shakti that have to become involved in the bringing of the world Savior. In other words, only to the pure of heart can the mystery come. Only to those who by nature have quietly and lovingly improved their own characters. Only through such persons can the Bodhi power within themselves be released. The release of this spiritual value can never come through hate, through war, through strife, through corruption, through dissipation, or for any reason other than that the person through whom it comes has achieved internal purity. Now, purity in Buddhism means freedom from illusion. Purity is the individual who cannot be led away by falseness. Therefore, there is something about it, as in the case of some of these Christian legends also. There is something about this virginity of the mother that bears witness to a kind of childlikeness, uncorrupted, undefiled, untouched by false values because of purity of inward heart. Only this is, therefore, the proper parent of enlightenment. Illumination comes to the pure of heart, and those who live as far as humanly possible in peace with all other living things. Now, we're going to see some of this coming along one of these days right here in our society. We're going to see that all this violence, all this clamor, all this pomp and circumstance is going to gradually fade away because it is solving nothing. All this effort to fight our way to peace, this effort to work our way to wealth and be happy at the same time, all these false values have to go, and the ability to rise above them gradually redeems the person. Every truth seeker who is honest, everyone who really recognizes the need for greater inner strength, is therefore becoming more and more a person of purity of heart and mind. It's interesting to note that in early English and other languages, the word virgin was not limited to the feminine. One of the kings of England was called the Virgin King. It was simply a symbol of integrity, of purity of motive, of purity of intention, and of the living of a righteous life in a world of temptations. So the idea of the achievement of the virgin self, the coming of the mother of the mystery before the mystery itself can be born, indicates the idea that in the heart doctrine, love becomes the mother of enlightenment. Love becomes the mother not only of human enlightenment, but in some mysterious way, expanded beyond our comprehension, becomes the one great gate that leads into the infinite. All other factors are secondary to the unselfish love of one human being for another, and of all human beings for their creating power. All these things are substanced in the Buddhist teachings. There are all kinds of legends and fables about all of these things, but every one of them has something to do with the fact that the inner person is the mother of truth, that this inner person is the love of truth, is the purification of life, and is the consecration of conduct, until finally it is the perfected soul that brings forth the Redeemer. This all becomes part of a world message. It is everywhere among the doctrines of mankind, because it is always something that has come out from within the being itself. These different religions are the human beings' gradual unfolding of their own potentials. Little by little we demand a different type of deity because we are becoming a different type of being. The God of battles is no longer our saints. We no longer respect authority, power, despotism, and tyranny. We no longer expect to be slaves of some eternal despot whom we can never understand and from whose tyranny we can never escape. This type of theology is gone. And the kind of theology also that teaches or tries to teach us that because of a few short years in this world, our eternal destiny is measured. That we must go to some other place and suffer forever for sins committed by our own ignorance. These things simply will not fit into the Buddhist philosophy of life. Rather, it is always a case of growth. And I think it's also important to remember in thinking of the law of reincarnation and karma as taught in Buddhism. Buddhism does not teach that karma goes on forever and that forever we make the same mistakes, forever we suffer for them, and we keep on suffering and going on, and as a result of eternal mistake, we are eternally reborn. This is not the Buddhist idea at all. We are not here to go on forever by rebirth. We are here to release ourselves from the wheel of the law by transcending the level of living which caused the mistakes. In other words, we are not punished but once for any one thing. And punishment is not necessarily painful. Punishment is recognition of realities. And the individual who outgrows a fault corrects it. He does not have to be tyrannized forever. The end is not punishment. The end is revelation. When the individual sees the reasons, understands them, and corrects them in himself, he is therefore in that time released from the wheel of karma. He is released from the wheel of rebirth. The enlightened soul only returns by voluntary intent. Those who have gone a long way in enlightenment, or those who are in great need of more travel, but are aware of the facts, are born again. But the great and illumined soul is born perhaps with the greatest importance, because it is a voluntary action. The Bodhisattva's rebirth is a voluntary action. Now, in the case of Buddha, there is a very interesting story about this. As a bodhisattva over a period of ages, he paid all his karma, went through all the embodiments shown by the carvings on the walls of the Borobudur in Java, and at last he came to the final decision to attain the nirvana. But there was one debt he had not paid, a debt from way back, a small and insignificant karmic occurrence, but was not finished. But it was that unfinished business that made it possible for him to come back, which was another side of their philosophical thinking. So when the poor man gave him the tainted food because he had nothing else to give, and Buddha ate it, and as a result died, he told his disciples that in accepting this tainted food, he had passed his last test. He had made right the last wrong in his existence. And therefore, having attained this, he could then go on. But instead of going on, he held that fault for ages in order to be able to come back. It was the doorway through which he could come back until he corrected it. This is kind of an interesting sidelight on some of the symbolism involved in these stories. One of the most beautiful stories, I think, of that, of course, is the Bodhisattva doctrine of Northern Asia. As we look upon the magnificent statuary and paintings and images of Japan and Korea, we see these wonderful, radiant, luminous figures of the Bodhisattva, which means the enlightened soul, the enlightened self, the enlightened being. The Bodhisattvas are the ones who have gone all the way except the last step. And there is a story of the Bodhisattva Kannan, or Kuan Yin, that at last, having gone through all the sorrows of life, having been reborn in every kingdom in order that it might know the pain of living things, having taken the obligation of harmlessness to all that lived, this being was now able to face perfection. And as it stood at the gates of the infinite to go through, it heard a funny little cry, and looked and saw a tiny birdling in a nest, the mother dead beside it. And in that moment, the Bodhisattva took the great obligation of renunciation, and took to itself the vow that it would not attain the liberation or accept it until it could take every living thing, including the soul of that little bird, with it into the infinite. Beautiful little legend. Beautiful. It tells us something, all of us. And here on Mother's Day, it seems to me a very good thing that it does, because it helps us to understand a lot of life that we pass through too lightly and too insignificantly. All that we are striving to do in our best moments and in the moments of our own enlightenment, we are striving to be useful, to help all that lives, because in this way we achieve the full labor of the Shakti. The Great Mother comes in all of us when love takes precedence over every other emotion in life. It comes when a complete renunciation of self ends selfishness. A complete renunciation of gentleness ends all hate, stress, and tension. And I think today maybe we are in great need of this kind of a religion, this kind of an attitude towards life. Under the pressure of our economic situations and political stress and international complications, the individual is moved to attitudes that are not right for him. He hates. He is belligerent. He despises. He gossips. He condemns. He is forever looking for the wrong in things. And in so doing, he locks himself in the illusion of his own material attitudes. I think there is something to be said for Buddhist mysticism, which could be carried over into any religion. In other words, Buddhism is not primarily interested in making Buddhists. It is not interested just in converting anybody to anything. What it is interested in is seeing all human beings living nearer to a purpose of universal peace, of universal accord, of universal understanding, of universal affection and regard. And therefore, in this case, the Son, or the Eternal, comes to each person and asks the right to come in. This is Christ knocking at the door. Each person has the right to accept into itself this power. A dedication to the release of soul power, which is to be found by gentle meditation, prayer, thoughtfulness, consideration, and the gradual disciplining of false attitudes. If the individual becomes capable of eliminating most or the greater examples of his own inconsistencies, both the Buddhist and many other religions have also a formula represented by Yakushi Niori, the Buddhist deity of healing, the healing power of the truth. That in some mysterious way, even physical sickness often has to give way to enlightenment. It can be strangely made better. There is also a very interesting formula about the great physician in the Buddhist doctrine. And the great physician came to each person who was sick, but they rejected him because his medicines were not pleasant to them. He told them frankly that the healing medicine was that by which the soul was changed. So they rejected him, and he went his way, and no one paid any attention to him because they wanted to have health through excess rather than through discipline. And so one by one they got sicker, until finally, in desperation, they called the great physician back and agreed to follow his instruction. When they did, they got well, and everyone lived happily ever after. The great physician is, in the Buddhist doctrine, the power of love over hate. It is the power of tranquility, the power of the great paternal feelings that we have. And it is represented very largely when each person becomes a parent of others. Each person becomes the immaculate parent for the incarnation of the great light of the world. These things are perhaps also shadowed down into our material existence. And on Mother's Day, it is very good to think of some of these things, because there is a tremendous power in the simple fact of motherhood itself, by which life is changed and transformed, and each individual moves from merely part of a pattern to one of those who is becoming a creator, someone through whom life is to come into the world. And in this life we have the physical, but in the philosophical level this light becomes the mystical. And light as physical perpetuates the species. Light as mystical perfects the whole world and all that inhabits it and all that works through it. So on this day, let's be very grateful for those who have brought life to this world through the natural laws of maternity, and also realize that this embodiment is a symbol, a very beautiful and wonderful symbol, in which the cherishing of life, in which the mystical experience that the individual goes through in the process of bringing forth a physical child, is in a mysterious way surrounded by the presence of universal laws and principles which also have to do with the production of the soul. This human soul is born through the mind and through the body. It is precipitated from the spiritual life of the individual. It becomes finally the heir to all the ages, and it is the child that will never be a pain to its parent. This bringing forth of the sun child, the soul child, the Buddha child in ourselves, is the gradual unfoldment of the eternal through the temporal, of the invisible through the visible. The principle will not be seen, but it will be made known by its preachments. And the preachments in this case represents the conduct, donations and contributions to world good, and everything that can be done to make a better life. So there's constantly coming into this world souls that are brought here, if by love, by the strongest power there is, and that the entire experience of physical love has its absolute equivalent on the higher planes by the mystical experience of soul love. And without love, there is nothing but sterility. Without love, there is nothing but death. And with love, there is everlasting life. So the gradual transformation of ourselves into the love principle is more or less a feminizing process. It is making the principle of love stronger than the principle of law, but does not break the law, because the law itself arises in an infinite consciousness of love. The law is there because it is necessary to the fulfillment of the great affection of the universal parent for its children. So all in the world we can really hope for is that gradually private people in their daily living will begin to live closer to the realities of good, that little by little our failings will be transformed by a kind of affection. When we love someone very dearly, we will sacrifice much for them. Their happiness becomes more important than our own. And we never can be happy until something or someone else is more important than ourselves. All the way through, the world of law was the world of the prophets. The world of law was the old dispensation. But the understanding of the law, not its abolishment, but the understanding of the law becomes the new dispensation, because it is that by which we gradually come to understand that law itself has no existence except as an instrument of love. As the parent must correct a child, so universal law, because it loves creation, corrects its mistakes. Little by little, we move into a more rarefied and gentle atmosphere of relationships with things. We are no longer quite so heavily indoctrinated with the passing moods and attitudes that make up most of our lives. It is a good thing, perhaps, in this day of the year when we become very much remembering of our parents and those that we've known, and we remember the half-forgotten and the half-remembered. It is nice to realize that this whole pattern, everything involved in it, is nothing but divine love coming to age in the human being. And also that when the human being becomes an instrument of the divine love, then the solar system is in order. And all the worlds that are continue to fulfill their destinies under the loving care of infinite life, light, and truth. These things, if we think about them, may help us to have a little happier day today and look forward to something nice tomorrow. Thank you very much.